My name is Rita Volya, and I'm Rusty Glicksman's wife. Thank you all for being here. It means a great deal to me to gather with Rusty's family, including his brother, friends and readers, to share lessons in coming and going together. In the 1970s, Rusty traveled widely through Europe, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Tibet, and Israel. India, in particular, became a place he returned to again and again, a place where he felt unexpectedly at home. Those journeys form the outer structure of lessons in coming and going, but they are not really what the book is about. The book did not begin as a memoir. It began as separate stories, moments, encounters, impressions, written over many years. Some were written close to the events themselves. Others were written later from the detailed notes Rusty kept. Only much later did he begin to see that these pieces belonged together, that taken as a whole, they traced something larger, a life shaped by movement, curiosity, discomfort, and reflection in a search for truth and meaning. Living with him meant living with someone who was always thinking, questioning, searching, not restlessly exactly, but insistently. That spirit is very much alive in this book. That, I think, is what Lessons in Coming and Going is really about. It isn't a travel book in the usual sense, even though it moves through many countries and landscapes. It is about Rusty's need to step outside comfort, not as form of bravado, and not out of rejection of where he came from, but because he believed that comfort could insulate him from truth. He chose third-class trains, sleeping on train station platforms waiting for departure, or in front of airport doors waiting for the first bus. Spare rooms, long walks, fatigue, awkwardness, and solitude, because those were the conditions under which most people lived. He felt his privilege deeply, and often painfully, but he resisted smoothing over the rough edges, because he believed that doing so would make the encounter false to others, and false to himself. Discomfort for Rusty was a form of honesty. It was a way of listening with his whole body, not just his curiosity. What surprised me most since the book was published is how often readers told me how much it resonates with them. This is one person's story, very particular, very specific, and yet it opens something larger. Rusty was writing about longing, uncertainty, attraction, doubt, faith, and the desire to belong somewhere without ever fully belonging. Most of us know those feelings. We know what it means to leave something behind without knowing exactly what we are moving toward. We know the tension between freedom and commitment, between spiritual hunger and ordinary life. In that way, the places in the book are less important than the questions. Rusty gives language to questions many people carry quietly, and when someone does that honestly, it stops being just their story. I think that clarity about discomfort, about longing, about not knowing, is what gives this book its strength. Rusty didn't write a story about enlightenment or arrival. He wrote a story about paying attention, about being willing to be unsettled, and about staying open long enough for something real to happen. It's about discovering that good and bad, certainty and doubt, belonging and estrangement are not opposites. They are part of the same human experience. And now we will hear Rusty's words themselves, Tonight's readings speak to questions of faith, responsibility, and spiritual longing. We will begin in Varanasi, at the burning Ghats, and the early morning immersion in the Ganges, where Rusty confronts the impermanence of life directly. We will move to Jerusalem, where he wrestles with faith and belonging in a small hippie yeshiva. From there, we come to a passage from the chapter Water, where Rusty encounters a group of evangelical Christians engaged in relief work after a cyclone in Andhra Pradesh. Finally, we meet a young monk, Akshay Ananda, whose simplicity and freedom deeply move him, but whose path Rusty ultimately realizes he cannot follow. Thank you all for being here tonight, for listening, for reading, and for helping carry Rusty's word forward. Thank you.
Hi. Can you hear me? Should I be? Okay. So I met Rusty in 1970 when we were both students at McGill in Montreal, which was like over 55 years ago. We became very good friends, and that friendship continued for the rest of our lives. I have a box of letters on thin blue email paper that he wrote me in his very hard to decipher handwriting, sent from India over the years. And I loved receiving these glimpses of a very different world. I'm reading about the Varanasi chapter. It was his second time in Varanasi, the city on the Ganges, that has a central place in the Hindu traditions of pilgrimage, mourning, and death. Whoops, excuse me, wrong page. The moon was full. People were sleeping along the edge of the street. It took me a moment to comprehend that they were the same beggars I'd seen in the morning, the same cripples and lepers. They were sleeping where they begged all day. I realized that some of these people never moved. Many couldn't, no strength, sometimes no legs, or maybe just nowhere to go. But I didn't feel pity. Who was I to feel pity? They were choosing to die in the holy city of their God. Would I be able to say as much when my time came? My awe of this place increased with each step I took. I'd wrapped myself in a large dark shawl from which I'd fashioned a kind of hood, like a monk's cowl. I felt as if I were an intruder in a private place, and the shawl made me feel less conspicuous. But no one took much notice of me. It was very different from the daytime, when so many seemed to see me only as a tourist with money in my pockets. The moon was brighter and larger and more startling than ever. The river was enfolded in a misty white net. I wanted to go to the burning platforms. I wasn't sure if I should go, but I wanted to. What business had I at the piers? What right had I to watch them usher off their dead? But I believed it was a pure desire, so how could it be an intrusion? I stumbled my way through the maze of the bazaar and approached the great concrete patios which dropped sheer into the river. 3 or 4 piers were burning, and several others were being built. No one seemed offended or bothered by my presence. They were preoccupied with more important things. In the back of my mind, I think I expected some sort of stench, some sort of death reek, but there was no horror, no stench. Bodies bound in white shrouds were carried in as new piers were readied. There were priests and flowers and incense and prayers, but mainly there was just the burning of the dead. These were the first dead I had ever seen. I wasn't sure what I felt, except that it wasn't distress. They were dead, and I was alive. They had been alive, and I would be dead. I saw no great difference between us, and I no longer felt like an intruder. As a pier burned itself out, the body reduced to ash, the whole smoldering pile was pushed off the edge of the platform and into the river. Ashes, charred wood, flowers, bits of bone. It all went home to Mother Ganges. As the sun rose and the city woke, people made their way down to the river. In their tattered lungis, the lowliest rickshaw drivers came to bathe before seeking customers. In liberating disregard of the usual social boundaries, they were joined side by well-to-do families, as well as sadhus, street kids, and working people of all kinds. All along the shore, children splashed in and out of the water, in one way, not so different from children splashing around the New Jersey shore, while in another way, they didn't even reside on the same planet. For the poor especially, the day was not easy to face, so the ablution of Mother Ganges must have seemed like donning the armor of God. I wanted to go in too, but how could I? I looked at the water. The river was slow and murky, brown as a mud hole. This was the notorious filthy river of India. But what about that beautiful girl and those men there praying? This water touched their bodies. This water caressed that lovely girl. Was I crazy? But it was said that the Ganges was always pure, that no germs could live in it, that Ganges water would never go stagnant. I didn't know what was true and what was false, but I did know that eyes are not always competent to see. I stripped down to my underpants. The water was cool up to my waist. It didn't feel so magical. There was nothing so extraordinary, but it was nice. It was fine. This was a fine river, and I felt wonderful. Hello, sun. Good morning, day. Have I told you how glad I am to be here in Varanasi? Hello, river. Have I told you how glad I am to have you flow all over me? Maybe you'll bless me a little? I slipped under completely, the water covering my head, my feet raised off the bottom. Fetal, baptismal, in the mikvah, like Jonah, ready to see afresh, and up, splash. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, I murmured quietly to myself, then chanted more loudly, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. I'd heard that a bath in the Ganges washed away all impurities and sins, and that Varanasi was a place of miracles, of healing, of sanctification. But Hinduism, like all the great religions, also maintained the bottom line: you reap what you sow. Though while in the holy river, a bather might be as pure and clean as Lord Krishna himself, it was also taught that demons waited back on the shore. When the bather came out, his demons, like hungry goblins, pounced back upon him, only to be purged, finally, by right action in the world. Perhaps this was the real goal of pilgrimage to Varanasi, I thought, as the cool water rippled around me. That bathing in Holy Mother Ganges should inspire one to live a right and just life. That would be enough, already a miracle precious and wonderful. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom.
Hi, I'm Phillips, and I traveled to India with Rusty twice, once in 1978 and again in 2019, 2 years before he died. The story I'm about to read takes place in 1978. We traveled together for a while and then parted ways in the city of Madras, now known as Chennai. I went south, and Rusty caught a train north to Calcutta. But like Odysseus in the ancient Greek poem, it took him a while to get there. He was sidetracked by something he never expected. To get to Calcutta, he writes, from Madras, I had to go through the state of Andhra Pradesh, which had been struck by a massive cyclone a couple of months earlier. While still in the States, I read horrendous reports of the devastation maybe more than 100,000 dead or homeless in the millions. On the train, I was reading an Indian newspaper article on the continuing aftermath from the cyclone, how the traumatized population was still in need of everything from drinking water and medical supplies, to shelter, to psychological support. When I noticed my neighbor trying to see what I was reading, I turned to the man and said hello. He was short and dark, looking typically South Indian, and he spoke serviceable English. He introduced himself as the Reverend Brother Ebenezer and informed me that he was a born-again Christian and the minister at the Evangelical Metropolitan Mission in Vijayawada, a large city up the coast in Andhra Pradesh. We shook hands and began to chat. After the usual small talk, where are you from? How do you like India? Brother Ebenezer asked, to which Christian denomination are you belonging? This was the question of a man so certain that he knew all the possible answers that he might as easily have been inquiring about the flavors at his favorite ice cream shop. I'm not a Christian, I replied. I'm a Jew. The man's face twitched. He looked like a confused puppy, his jaw slack, his eyes puzzled. There was a light struggling to switch on in those eyes. Something was clicking, but only in a foggy sort of way. I tried to help. Hebrews? The people of Israel? The light went on full blast. It wasn't ice cream at all, but something altogether different. Something totally new and exotic. His fingertips grazed my shoulder, hesitant, as if he wanted to prod my flesh, to convince himself that it was indeed something substantial. Yet he also seemed reluctant, almost fearful. The people of Moses? He asked, incredulous. To him, I realized Western people were all Christians. Yes, absolutely. The people of Moses, that's me, I assured him, aware as I did so that it was to his utter delight. To Brother Ebenezer, I gathered Jews were something from the Old Testament, progenitors of his Lord, probably more mythic than real. Obviously, the Reverend was not used to seeing many Westerners and unaware of the fact that some of them were Jewish. After some further talk of my bloodlines, and as I became as delighted with the good gentleman as he was with me, he invited me to his mission and to the relief effort they were carrying out. With barely a second thought, I accepted. The morning after my arrival, I was behind the wheel of the Ethicor Jeep, that's the name of the relief organization, a four-wheel drive Indian-made Mahindra. There was work to do. We spent the whole day in a village about 2 hours away, pumping out the well. The newspaper articles couldn't have prepared me for what I saw. Though the corpses were gone, the devastation was still overwhelming, and the glassy-eyed survivors seemed like ghosts of the people who had once inhabited the village. I didn't know how to react, and I said little, only focusing on whatever I could do to help. Alex, swarthy and strong, dramatically hoisted the heavy equipment on his shoulder, and he and James climbed down into the putrid well. It was dirty, hard work. The dazed villagers huddled about in somber little clumps. The children clung to their mothers or to whatever adults were looking after them if their parents were dead. When we finally got clean water from the well, we could feel relief, yet only in a muted kind of way. Too many had died. The waters had come and killed. Now the water would bring back life. These people could live now, but it would take time for them to again find joy in their lives. At one point, James nodded toward a fellow squatting in the shade of one of the few remaining palm trees. That man lost 12 members of his family, including his parents, he told me softly. James, Gentle, quiet, shy, was the warmest of the group. I would learn that this always didn't serve him well, as perhaps he was too caring and consequently suffered too deeply. In the following days, he and I would grow closer and closer. I learned so much that first day. When we returned to camp in the evening, I went over to our own well and gazed into its clean waters as if it were a holy shrine. There was no need of a statue or a cross or a Torah scroll. Water is a thing divine. We are born out of water, and water sustains us throughout all our life. What need is there of any God to pray to when we need only love, honor, and revere our water? Our well in the village was more than a necessity. It was a symbol of all necessity, and it was cared for scrupulously. Indian people understand water, I thought. You see it in how thoroughly they wash their clothes and their bodies, and how they end each meal with a full glass of water. They love water. The cyclone contaminated the fresh water of life. Epicor was there for the water, and as such we cherished our own water source, carefully keeping our well free of debris, meticulously handling the buckets and ropes. The sanctity of water is a concept often difficult to impress upon pampered foreigners, accustomed to washing machines and dishwashers, to long showers and baths, to good urban plumbing. As a traveler, I had learned to understand and respect water. In Andhra Pradesh, I learned to love water. James and Wilson and Alex and Gangaram became my friends. We worked together all day, chatting informally. Unlike the village people, they all spoke good English. We shared in the trauma that we witnessed, and we rejoiced together when we brought clean water. But there was a jarring disconnect between day and night. When I went to sleep, they stayed up a while longer to pray, and I soon realized that much of that prayer was from me and my salvation. They were praying for their friend who was fated to eternal damnation in the fires of hell because he had not welcomed Christ into his life. It was weird enough working in that landscape of death, of shock, of despair, but it was surreal doing it with friends who, beneath the mundane conversation and smiles and small talk, grieved for my soul. They never preached to me. They may have wanted to, but understood that implicit in our friendship were boundaries that needed to be respected. So they quietly prayed for me. That's how it was between me and my new friends. Even as we could hang out so casually all day, they still had a problem. I could see it especially with James. The closer we got, the more I detected his sadness and fear. But there was nothing I could do about it. It was his cross to bear, and his faith would have to carry him through. I thought to myself, just who is worrying about whom?